Let's go sit.
In case you didn't hear me, there are a few chairs that are still outside that you're welcome to bring in if you'd like to sit. You're also welcome to stand. Okay, and a few more chairs are coming in. Well, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Josh Bloom, and I'm one of the co-curators of this exhibit. We have a wonderful panel here today, and I'll first start off with asking everyone to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their introduction to AI, how they came upon it, and how they're using it in their work. And then we'll get into a conversation about what we see here and about some of the broader context of AI. I wanted to just first start off by thanking all of you for coming to this really wonderful exhibit and hopefully a very stimulating panel. I'll tell you just a quick thing about myself just to kick things off. My name is Josh, as I said, and I'm a professor in the astronomy department at UC Berkeley, and I have an appointment up at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I first encountered AI when I stumbled upon it as a scientist, when we as astronomers started realizing we had a big data problem, and the kinds of things that we did looking at data, and particularly asking our graduate students and undergrads to look at data, wasn't going to scale with the amount of data that was coming. So I stumbled upon AI as a useful tool to accelerate and enhance our workflow, and that was about 15 years ago, and the tools themselves have changed, but the acceleration of our work and the kinds of things we do as scientists has been greatly enhanced in many aspects of AI. And it was through that experience that I started to ask questions along with our co-curator Steve of what does it mean to be doing AI in our own work? And that question can get asked and answered in many different ways. Let me first start off with Carl Bass. You can tell us a little bit about yourself and
Sure.
Your first encounters with AI.
Sure. Let's see. I've been making things for 50 years or so. All kinds of things, metal and wood things. But my first encounter with AI is I worked for 25 or 30 years building engineering tools, things that were called CAD tools, computer-aided design. And somewhere around 10 to 12 years ago, had the sense that of all these CAD tools, the computer really did aid any design. The computer allowed you to document the design that already existed in your head, but it actually did aid you. And it was about the time that the cost of computing was going down, and it was becoming really cheap. And we said to ourselves as a thought experiment, if you had all the computing power in the world, could you design things differently? And then, the thought went, as the cost goes to zero and you have an infinite amount of computing, what would you do differently? And we thought about the process of making things, which is often, I make something, I test it or analyze it and simulate it. I go through this loop of prototypes, and then eventually I run out of time or money or just get bored with it and I go, good enough. And I said, there has to be a better way than just good enough. And so what if you allowed the computer to do 10,000 designs or 100,000 designs or 100 million designs and gives you the best one? And it became, what if I prompted it by saying, these are the things that this thing needs to do. If it's the space envelope, it's made out of this material, these are the loads that are going to be put on it, and why don't you come up with an optimal answer? And that was kind of my introduction to it. And did it both professionally and personally.
We'll start getting into the art in a little bit. Ahna Girshick.
Hi, I'm Ahna Girshick. I'm one of the artists in the show, and I also have my art studio right behind in that space. And I think I started learning about neural networks in college. I was a computer science major. And one of the things that I was really curious about was what those internal states of a neural network that was like a very primitive version of what we have now at that time. What the internal states, like what was going on in there, kind of like looking into your own brain, which is very opaque. And so it was too early to really, like the AIs back then were just very simple. And so instead, I went in the direction of computational neuroscience, which is a kind of a similar thing where we're looking at the algorithms that the brain uses. In my case, I was interested in visual perception, and so I did a PhD at Berkeley in that area. And now AI has progressed a lot since then. So in my artwork and in my research, I'm kind of going back to that question of kind of peeking in to either a human brain or an artificial brain and trying to make sense of it and depict it somehow.
Thank you. Ken Goldberg.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So I'm Ken Goldberg. I teach at Berkeley in engineering, and my very first encounter with AI was actually in Berkeley. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but we came out to visit my aunt here in Berkeley, and she took us up to the Lawrence Hall of Science. This was like, I'm really dating myself here, but this is, I think, the 60s, maybe the early 70s, and they had an exhibit about artificial intelligence. It was very far ahead of its time, but they had Eliza, if anybody knows what that is, but you could type at this thing and it would talk to you essentially, and I was blown away. Right then and there, I decided this is what I wanted to do, and I'm still doing, really, I'm still doing the same thing. And slightly, I took a turn to start to do more robotics, which is really what I do today, mostly. But I've always been interested in AI and followed it through all of its ebbs and flows, because it's so interesting, because I talk sometimes about the AI winter. And I don't know if people, are you familiar with the AI winters? A number of you are. But it's interesting because AI has had these high points when everyone would thought it's around the corner, and then you get disillusioned, and then there's a winter where everybody thinks, oh, that was all hype. And then it sort of starts up again, and then there's been these. So I'm kind of very conscious right now that I think we're in the new upcycle, and I'm feeling like we need to dampen the curve a little bit, just like we did with COVID. Don't stop it, but just slow it down a little bit so we don't overshoot here. But I'm not in the show myself, although I've been following this since Josh started talking about it, and I love the concept. But I am in because my contribution is in the fact that Elle has a piece in the corner here, and she's a student in my class, and I've taught a class this semester called Art and AI, and it's so much fun. I'm teaching it with Lisa Wymore, who's a dance professor, and we just started talking about this, and we came up with this idea that we wanted to explore ourselves, but also with our students, all the tools that were out there for making poems with ChatGPT and haikus and different kinds of poetic, dialogues, and then images with DALL-E and all those Stable Diffusions, and then music and dance. We've been actually trying all these different tools that are out there, and it's been so much fun, and the students have been doing incredible projects for their final project. And Elle was in that class. Josh said, I'm doing this art show, and I said, fantastic, please come and talk to the students and see if any of them want to try and rise to the occasion. And one of them really did. She's really a firecracker. She's a freshman, and she said, I have this idea. Will you talk about it later?
Yeah, we'll hopefully get into it. Yeah.
All right, it's such a cool, that piece in the corner. She's unfortunately on a trip this weekend, so she's not here, but she is very wonderful, and I'm super proud that she is in the show.
So Ken, you're talking about some of the tools that you're exploring in your class, and Carl, you touched on the way in which AI sort of started infusing its way, and you brought it into your own work. You talked about your interest in understanding kind of the mind of the machine. Can you all talk about the use of AI for yourself in the creative process? And I'm also interested a bit in these tools. What tools are you using? What are the barriers to entry? Maybe some people here are curious themselves about using some of these tools. And what kind of advice would you have for people who are thinking about bringing AI into the creative space? Let's start with Ahna.
Barriers to entry to using AI in art or something?
In your,
yeah.
and I want to know. I
Uh-huh.
think people want to know
Yeah.
about your creative use of AI.
Right. Yeah, so I can speak to my experience. So my work are these along this wall here and these windows hanging on your right, and so you can maybe see the connection a little bit. I can start with this gray piece, this big gray one here. I was inspired by, I mean, really going back to like 16th century cabinet of curiosities where scientists would collect and preserve all these specimens, and then naturalists started doing it, like Charles Darwin, with like specimens of butterflies and beetles, and as a way to organize and preserve scientific information. And so I'm thinking of these as like technological specimens that I collected from this landmark neural network it came out in 2014. It's called Inception, and it's owned by Google. It's open source though. So I'm peering into it and collecting these specimens and actually making them visible to people, because most of us like have AI on our phones, but we don't get to see kind of the inner workings of it. And what each of those patterns represents is like the learnings of the synthetic neuron. And what it learns to be sensitive to is also what it's searching for when it's deployed. So it's like this visual dictionary for an AI where it references this in its operations. So I'm kind of thinking about it in that context. And then, and in terms of tools, I'm not using the new popular generative AI tools for this. I'm writing my own code and to visualize the training of a neural network and probing this open source, pre-trained, really large model.
So these are like little filters.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're filters,
Okay. Great.
Exactly.
So how many filters are there in total? Millions, right?
It really depends on what neural network, because I mentioned like looking at neural networks when I was like 18, and they were so simple, but they are actually like could do things, and so it just depends. This isn't that complex of a model, but it's complex enough. 2014 is when deep learning was really starting to take off. So these neural network models with, say, a dozen layers at that time. But this is 112 neurons from a particular layer in that model. There might be on the order of 1,000 or 2,000 in that model, and then obviously many more connections between them.
Thanks, Ken. You're a roboticist, so you're almost certainly using some forms of machine learning in your technical work, but you're also an artist as well. Where do you see AI for you in your creative endeavors?
Well, I've used robots in making art for some 40 years or so. I wanted to be an artist. My mother said, you can be an artist after you get your engineering degree. So I did that, which I think it was good advice. But I was able to keep doing art. And so years ago, we made a robot garden. That it was the early days of the internet, so anyone could come in and tend a garden, a real garden, over the internet, and it stayed online for 9 years. And I'm very proud of that, because as an engineer, rarely do you have an experiment that runs that long. I mean, almost never, basically. So it was really an interesting thing to keep that running over those years. Most recently, we've been doing new projects, art projects with gardens. This time, a fully autonomous garden. So it's we call it Alpha Garden, like AlphaGo, that's out there, and AlphaZero. So it's a garden that's in the Berkeley greenhouse that's completely tended by a robot. And I can say more about that later, but that's also been in an exhibit. And then the most recent thing I've done was with a dancer, Katie Kwan, who's actually lives in Berkeley, and she just got her degree from Stanford, a PhD in robotics, but she's also a professional ballet dancer. And she and I are friends, and we started talking about working together. We started experimenting with a few things using OpenPose, which is an AI tool that can track your motions, your joints. And so we used that to watch her as she danced, track her motions, and then extract from that these patterns, these sinusoids that we could use to drive the robot. Then we had the robot move, and then she responded to it. And then this went back and forth, and then we got invited to do a performance in Brooklyn. And then she came up with the idea, well, I want to do an 8-hour version of this. And I said, well, why are we thinking 8 hours? And she was like, I don't know. And I said, well, that's a work day. That's a work. And then we started thinking it was really about the relationship of robots and work, and the fears that are out there that robots are going to steal our jobs. And we wanted to. I don't believe that, and I think anyone who really works with robots is not thinking that's going to happen. I don't know how you feel, Carl, but if you work with robots, they're not going to take over anytime soon, okay? So there's a big gap between the hype and the reality, and we wanted to show the contrast. So she danced on the stage for 8 hours with this arm, and it was beautiful on one hand, but also a commentary on much more complex of the motions and nuance that she could express as a human than what the robot could do. And that's really what I'm interested in, is in a way using these technologies to almost critique the technologies or the mythologies around them.
Yeah, and by the way, it was an amazing piece. I got a chance to see part of it. And Ken has a wonderful TED Talk on sort of where we're at with robotics now that I just absolutely love. Carl, you were shaking your head, or nodding your head, one of those two, while Ken was talking about kind of the where we're at with AI and taking our jobs. I know that's taking us a little bit farther away from my previous question to you, but you've been in the business world for a number of years, so you have this interesting vantage point on labor and the mechanization of labor. Can we allow ourselves to go into that space a little bit, and then we'll tack back to the art world?
Sure. I actually once did this talk at South by Southwest called "What Will Happen When the Robots Take Our Jobs?" And it was interesting, since I didn't know much about it. I did what good people do when they don't know much. I crowdsourced my talk. And I went out and talked to all the smart people I know who know about robots. And it was really interesting in trying to figure out, and what I was really searching for is figuring out what robots couldn't do. And and it was interesting. The first guy I talked to was he had won the first BattleBots competition. And I said, so what can it do? It won't be good for taking care of old people. And he said, what, are you kidding? It's gonna be great for that. All you gotta do as a robot is like when you say, I get up in the morning, my knee hurts. And all the robot has to do is go, that would be great. I don't need a person to do that. I just want like a little bit of empathy, is all it takes. But in general, I totally agree with Ken, is that we are not close to robots taking over. I think it's overblown. I mean, the new question that replaces that, which is almost identical, is will AI take all of our jobs? And I think it's undoubtedly true that a lot of jobs will be destroyed, and hopefully, just like with computers or robots, way more jobs. I mean, if you go back in time, what's it, Keynes, who says in 1930 or something, where he says he has pity for all his grandchildren because they will no longer have jobs because everything will be automated. And so that most people will only have to work 5 hours a week. And what are they going to do with all their spare time? And he was a smart guy, and he got it. I can't believe how wrong he got it. And I think the same thing is true. My only question about AI right now, is it like uniquely different than every other technical improvement? Each bit of progress, overhyped in the beginning, underestimated in the long term. But the world adjusts pretty well. And the only question is, is there a singularity around AI where it's distinctly different? And my guess at this point, as a betting person, I would say no, it's not unique.
Well, I mean, what's interesting, of course, is this idea that it may displace parts of labor, but as we think about AI's role in creativity and displacing some of the creative activities that in the past we thought you had to go to art school to be able to execute, we're now seeing this lots of examples where AI is at best augmenting and accelerating the process of, let's say, things like illustration, and at worst, actually displacing that labor. So to me, it seems like one of the things that's unexpected with this new wave that we're in, I guess it's a summer of AI, about to become fall and then winter, is that it's coming for the creatives, right? There are places where we're fearing that. And I wonder, in the context of the work that we're surrounded with here, and some of you have created, if anyone wants to comment on that, and the role of AI in displacement of the creative labor.
Anna, you want to say something?
Were you about to say something?
I have something, but you go first.
You go first. Yeah.
Okay.
Forget it.
All right. By the way, I do not think that we're going to lose jobs. I think that I believe that AI is going to enhance our ability to be more human. What I mean by that is that it's going to take over things that we don't like doing. And if you think about the spreadsheet and so many other innovations, the internet for one, it's made us more efficient, more effective at what we do. And I think that AI is going to be doing that as well. I think that we're going to sharpen our human skills, which are very, very subtle and complex, that have to do. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, Jonathan's saying speak up. So, because I think everything I've learned from robots and my experience with AI is a greater and greater appreciation for humans and their nuance, their empathy, their judgments, their intuitions. Humans are amazing, and I just keep getting more and more impressed by them. And I'm not worried. I don't think it's going to take over the creative side either. I think that, so here's an interesting thing. Some of the people in Hollywood were afraid of the AI taking over the screenwriting, right? But I remember I was on a Zoom call with all these Hollywood screenwriters, and they were saying, we're this thing, and I said, how many of you have tried it? And it was really funny. They were like, I'm not going to try it. I'm not going to give my data. I'm not going to participate. I was like, really? You would not even try this thing? And they were like, no. It was kind of amazing. But then, there are certain people who are really embracing it and using it to kind of bounce ideas and sort of craft ideas and things like that, and they're being more effective. So I think that we're going to learn how to use these tools to be better, more creative. And it's amazing that you can take something like an image now with DALL-E, and you can say, or GPT-4, and you can say, okay, I want an image of a scene in a gallery with all these interesting people sitting at a lecture. And then you could say, no, I want them a little more diverse, and I want to see more people in that room, and all these things. And you can start crafting it, and it's an amazingly great tool for that. You can kind of have this dialogue like you can with a human designer, but you can go back and forth. Now you might say, well, then we don't need designers anymore. But no, I don't think that's the case. I think the designers will start to use this, the good designers, and they're going to be even more effective and productive. And productivity is really the key, because that's the thing that happens over time. And so as we increase our productivity, what's happened is it doesn't mean that we end up sitting around, it was Wally, right? That was the thing where we're sitting in our Berkeley lounges with our straw, sucking on our, Slurpees. I don't think that's what happens. But we find things. There's plenty of things for us to do, right? There's so much stuff we want to do. We want to explore. We want to talk. We want to have conversations and create more stuff. So I think that I'm really optimistic. I'm super optimistic. I love these tools, and I think these developments are very exciting. And so I think more creative people, and there's going to be more things for more creative people to do.
You're all agreeing with that, or is there some other angle?
I agree. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I agree with it, and I also think that as we adjust to the idea that certain images or videos or sounds might be machine generated, it just forces us to be creative in innovative new ways that we hadn't thought of before. Mm-hmm. Because it will no longer be accepted that necessarily like a machine generated or an image is hand generated versus machine generated. So it pushes people to come up with new things.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing is, I think with each introduction of technology, we overvalue technical craft and we undervalue the creativity and imagination. And I was telling Josh, I remember this time when I was at SIGGRAPH, the computer graphics conference. And I had grown up in the world of computer graphics, and we were all making images of like shiny balls and 7 polygons. Looks like the Tesla Cybertruck. You know, that's what our trucks look like. We were making all these things, and I was in the auditorium, and the thing that's now the trailer in Pixar films, the Luxo Jr., was shown for the very first time. And it took all these people who were doing kind of graduate student work with ugly images and imbued creativity and imagination. 20,000 people stood up and roared and realized the world changed on that day. And the difference was, it was John Lasseter, who was a Disney animator, who was a fine filmmaker, as later proven. He did something that none of the technical people, and I think each introduction of technology has this issue where people bemoan the loss of something that went before. And that's not really the essence of what we did.
So I'm trying to place, and I think you've started for us, place AI in a historical context as a tool, as part of a revolution that's happening more broadly in society. And is it right to be thinking about the invention of photography?
Exactly.
And about camera obscura?
Yep.
I mean, what are the other major events in the art history world that had a broad impact on society, but also fundamentally changed how we did art? And are we at that moment with AI right now?
I think so. Actually, that's a great analogy. So photography, if you remember, when photography came out, there was a sense that this was going to destroy art, that there was no need for artists anymore. You had this new machine of mechanical reproduction. So humans were, artists were out of work. They were going to be, and what was amazing was it didn't happen at all. But as Walter Benjamin said, and I love that, he said it didn't end art, but it changed art. It really opened the door to all of conceptual and impressionism. All the art that we know today is radically different than the realism that was the dominant form in art before photography. So photography changed art. That was amazingly productive. No shortage of artists, by the way, right? There's so many artists, and the art world is bigger than ever. So I think that this is another turning point, and I agree. I think it's a tool as powerful, and the graphical tools, as you said, and Photoshop, right, was another step. All those things didn't kill off the creative individuals. It just empowered them to do new things.
I mean, the personal computer was the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just moving graphic art online, 3D design. I mean, many things became digital art, as a result of that. And it was broadly useful, but it also, I think changed art.
Yeah.
So right now, I mean, we're in this gallery where I would say there are novel uses of AI in more traditional medium all around you. Different artists with different perspectives using AI and asking questions of AI in different ways. Undoubtedly, these are some of the few artists, I believe, in the world who are really leaning into these new tools and incorporating them into their work and incorporating them into different ways to express oneself. I'm curious to know what you think, and then maybe as we come to the questions from the audience, we can get to this a little bit later on, what those in the audience think about how important it is for the viewer to know that AI, or to understand that AI was used as part of the creative process. Are we at this level now where it's so novel that you kind of want to know, well, where was AI? Or are we going to get to a point where AI is just going to be part of it all, and no one's going to ask, well, how did you use AI? Where are we at with that? And what do you think, Ahna? Do you have a view of?
Yeah, I mean, in the fine art world, in contemporary art and experimental art, it's often interesting and important to understand the concepts and stories behind the art, and that's part of the art, right? And so if they use the AI tool, I think that could enhance, that could be part of the story, and it doesn't diminish from the artwork. It just, you have to think about what message you're trying to create, right? So I think this is where artists will have to get creative in thinking, okay, I want to use AI, but like his student Elle, who made the pieces in the back, like she used AI, but then she used her hands to paint and sculpt, and and she thought about it in a very interesting way, I think. So I don't see that as a problem, you know, it's part of the story of the art.
I mean, can we extrapolate further out, 10, 15 years from now? Is that still gonna be the thing, that AI's gotta be part of that story, or we just, I mean, we don't ask like, what kind of oil are you using in this oil paint anymore, right? Or how did you stretch this canvas? They're parts of the execution process of art that is now receded into the background because everyone's doing it.
I think it's going to recede. Right now it's novel and unique, but you know, you look at traditional sculptors or paint, you don't ask what kind of canvas, you don't ask what kind of oil, you don't ask who is your studio assistant, you don't ask which foundry actually cast your bronze. None of those are questions. I mean, but the question that I've been asking people for the last few weeks about this is, would they feel different about a movie or a song or a piece of art that they knew AI was involved? Does it change it? You know, I'm kind of a numbskull when it comes to like popular culture, so I don't really care who the director is. I don't really know much about music. I'm like, I either like it or I don't like it, and so I may not be in the majority, and so I'm just as curious about what other people think about whether it changes the experience to know something about this tool, and will it disappear?
Ken, you're the odd person out here in some sense, in that you don't have a piece in this show. What is your experience as you come to these pieces here?
Well, I'm always intrigued because I love the way that artists take new materials and new technologies and try and figure out what can they express that they couldn't express before. And so, you know, it really runs the gamut from, you know, the time when you had oil paints going to acrylics, right? So then you could paint outside, and there were all these steps. I love, who's the artist who's using this ultra black? He patented the black, what's his name? Anish Kapoor. Anish Kapoor has this like super black material, and then he's making these artworks out of it that are, and actually if you see them, they're like intense visually, because they just suck in all the light. And artists are using, Bruce Nauman used a ultraviolet or infrared cameras to turn on a camera at night in his studio, and he has this whole piece where you can see all these animals coming into his studio at night. And it's just like using all these things that I've always found interesting, how artists will quickly, actually, William Gibson has a great line. He said, if you want to know what's happening with the new technology, look at what artists and criminals are doing with it. So, artists are quick to jump on new technologies. They're going to try things and figure out what to do. And so I think it's really exciting, and I think that that artists, you know, will use things in their process, and big part of it is the judgment, the editing, because AI can help you generate some ideas, and then you'll be the one to pick out what's the right one. When do you stop, right? And I just want to make a quick comment on your piece, because I was just keep looking at it, and you know what? And it strikes me that when I first looked at it, somehow I couldn't place why I felt I had seen it before, but it reminds me of fishing lures. And you know what I realized? Because fishing lures are designed to catch the interest of fish. And so there is some similarity between these things, right?
Yeah.
They're like these little stimuli.
Well, I had also mentioned that I was inspired by like a naturalist collection of bugs, and you know, so there's that connection too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
I want to open up the floor for questions for those in the audience. Maybe the first question to you all is, does it matter as you're walking around this gallery and as you're consuming art in other places? Does it matter that it was assisted or made use of AI tools to you as the viewer? Anyone want to comment on that?
I think partially, just like you said, that right now we include that. I'm an artist as well. We include that if someone's using AI, which is part of the story, but also next generation, 10 years, 15 years, I don't think it's going to be relevant at all. I mean, I remember thinking just like the digital photography, there was so many photographers that were extremely opposed to digital photography, fought it, and there were seminars, and now we all use it.
you. And, yeah, so
I would
back
say that to the degree that you want to interpret information, data coming through the art, and want to understand what that data is about, the source of the data matters, just like in your dues, just like in your dues. It doesn't matter for the creative experience of it, perhaps, but if you're looking at something that's trying to be impactful about social commentary, Trevor Paglen piece, something like that, you want to understand what that information is been through, where it's coming from, how it's being developed, in order to send a message to you. Just like you want to know who's talking.
That's interesting. I want to come back to that because you're asking about sort of the ethical sphere of AI, and we can maybe ask the panelists about that in a second. So we'll put a pin in it, but there's some other statements about.
I think it's also interesting here, everything is very clearly still crafted by a human being. And so I think we're more able to accept AI as an element if there still is that layer of craftsmanship. And it's, I think when we get more uncomfortable with it, when that sense of human craftsmanship is disintermediated. That's when I think we get less comfortable with it. But here it's like, what's so beautiful, I think about it, is you have such humanly crafted things, all of which are using the AI as the element.
I mean, what's interesting about, I agree wholeheartedly about that. What's interesting about AI is that AI was crafted by humans, right? I mean, AI, there are other types of creators that are inventing these types of networks, that are gathering these data and are making them accessible. That's a different kind of creator than what we think of as a traditional artist. So what's interesting is we think about these like impersonal DALL-E images or this text written by ChatGPT, and it feels like it's just the machine. And obviously it is, and there's computation behind it, but it is, crafted by people who are themselves incredibly creative, and it is fed data that is fundamentally, also originally created by people. I mean, that's sort of the sharp elbows that we had in the show, of trying to bring art back into the analog world, recognizing that all of these pieces here are using these large language models or other large sort of generative models in different ways, in a digital world, and in a digital sense, in zeros and ones. But almost all of that data was originally pictures of people or pictures of the natural scene or hand-drawn illustrations that were just consumed in these very large models. And they were originally analog, right? And so I see what you're seeing here as a little bit of coming full circle from the analog to the digital, with craftsmanship in between, but maybe different than what we think of traditional artist craftsmanship.
AI, the craftsmanship of AI.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. We're not familiar.
I think I saw another question. There was their hand up, Gary.
Well, this is slight turn here, but I would agree with the panel. I'm not concerned that we're going to be running out of work, and I'm not concerned that this is the end of art, and I'm not concerned about if the AI generated or human. I'm comfortable just experiencing it. But I'm sitting here with a sense of dread, because what concerns me outside of the realm of art is the idea of using AI to create deep fakes. And I think when Carl asked the questions, is this singular in some way? And I actually think we're at the cusp of a threat to understanding if anything is real anymore. So while you guys are talking about art that's I can appreciate, I'm suppressing my dread of the political commercials that are going to be seen between now and then.
Yeah, art has always been helpful in helping us suspend some of our dread for a short period. We'll come back. We'll come back to that. I think we'll also bring it in when we talk about ethics. There were some other hands up.
I was wondering. I wanted to pose a question about whether it's ethical not to disclose that an artist used the AI in the process. Like when you go to the museum, the label says, mixed media or oil or acrylic or whatever. And it's full disclosure. And should artists disclose AI?
Yeah, and that gets back, so it has the ethical dimension, but it gets back to this question about AI as a tool. Is it just another form of oil or another type of canvas or another type of brush? We're not disclosing the full list of materials, right, in more traditional art forms. Do we need to do that? So why don't we talk about AI ethics in the context of creativity, and there's obviously a whole sort of larger societal question that's fraught. Anyone want to bring this up?
Well, I think that's really interesting, but remember, in artists, the big question that where a lot of artists will use photography as a basis. They won't necessarily put that on the label, right? Many artists use photographs. I work from photographs, and we don't necessarily disclose and share. This is a photograph I used to get this artwork, right? So that we sort of have that. We accept that, and then of course there's other thing, which is that every artist is influenced by other artists. And that's also fascinating to me that you don't cite sources. Mm-hmm. In science, we do. We have to cite our sources. If you don't, you're really in trouble. But we have to put in, little bullets every single thing we cite. But artists don't. It's fascinating to me because I wish they did. I wish they would say, well, I was influenced by all these. But somehow the art world doesn't want to hear that, or doesn't. It's just not the norm. So you don't hear all of those things, right? So there's a whole bunch of mystery that goes on behind the scenes. So I think AI is just going to be another one of those ingredients that people aren't going to tell you because it's part of the mystery of you need to see the finished thing and then judge for yourself. And I think that's a very important thing. I learned as an artist, I'll say one thing was when I started in art, I thought it was like engineering. I need to explain it, like I do with my papers or a new project, and I would explain at length. And people hated that. They didn't want to hear that. They really didn't. And then I learned to shut up and just put the art out there and let it speak for itself. And try to and that's hard, but I think artists will resonate with that, right? It's a feeling like you've got to let that work live on its own. And even as much as you have all these great ideas behind it, you want to tell people about, but you can't. Let them find their own path to it. And that's actually, if the work is good, if it's really interesting, there's going to be many different interpretations, and they're going to come out. Just so that whether was it AI behind this, was it a photograph, was it who was it influenced by? I think that leaving all that a little bit open is good for the art.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also just add on that, like, just because we have all these new tools doesn't mean that it's easy to make good art that fits into the art historical context and speaks to people that that they would want to look at it and appreciate it. And I mean, it's a new challenge, right? But it's not like you hit a button and it makes your art for you and that it will be received, in the fine art world.
I think there's always been a sense from artists that they want to create this aura of mystique. Like you don't fully understand. And I think, just like Ken says about inspiration, same thing is true with the process. I mean, when did you ever see a sculptor cite the studio assistant that actually carved all the stone? It was never done by them. None of the casting was done by them. There were thousands and thousands of people who have done all these things who all went unnamed. There's occasionally an industry like filmmaking that you ever look at the end and wonder what the fourth grip does? They at least give credit, but like most of the art world does not give credit to what goes on. And I think it's partially it needs to stand on its own, and partially there is something special about you can't imagine where this came from.
Let me put what you all three said in this question about whether we need to cite our sources. This idea that great artists steal has always been around, right?
Yeah.
But the scary part now, I think where some of the dread comes in as well, is now you can steal at scale, right? And now you can take things that are apparently uncopyrightable of like your style, although people are suing people for grabbing and grokking style and being able to generate something that looks like somebody else's style. And people have been doing this with fine artists for a while. I mean, we have like a kind of weird Van Eyck in the back over there, which is itself, subversive, right? That you're able to take somebody's style, generate a million versions of something they never did, and put something out of context from that person who died 300-400 years ago is now able to be re-expressed in an infinite number of ways. It's the scary part of the scale of being able to steal that I think that gets people.
Well, so explain
worried.
that for. Does everybody know the reference he's making to the Picasso, I think, quote, right? You can just explain it. 'Cause I think
So good artists copy, great artists steal, right? And you know, Picasso spent a lot of time copying and then stealing the ideas of former artists that he revered, right? Velázquez, he spent a huge amount of time just repainting this one painting in the Prado. And so that's the idea, that we can now steal at scale, as in we can now generate millions of these images. And as curators, in some sense, meta-curators of the art that comes out of the machine, now is our job just to pick the image that resonates the most, right? And that, I think, starts to feel a little different than the way in which art has been generated in the past. So maybe somebody wants to commentate on it.
Well, I will be a little counter. I will push back a little.
Please,
I'll push
please
back
do.
on that,
Yeah,
Josh,
that's
because
great,
I think
yeah.
appropriation has always been part of art. Artists always steal or borrow or whatever. That's one other thing I've learned is that the art, you know, there's a lot. Okay, so here's the thing I've also noticed is engineers super arrogant about art. So the analogy I make is you have a bunch of artists. They come they stumble into a laboratory and there's some equations on a blackboard, and they say, "Wow, I don't understand any of this. It must be brilliant." Okay, and then, meanwhile, you have a bunch of engineers who come into an art gallery, and they see some stuffed animals on the floor, and they say, "I don't understand any of this. This must be complete garbage." And so engineers are so arrogant. You know, there's this attitude, like you know, the art that engineers make. I have to say, as I am an engineer, so I'll take but mea culpa on this. But it's terrible. You know, it's terrible. And if you see, like, well, you know, the art that came out of like Deep Dream art, right?
Yeah.
It was not art in any real sense. It's not art, but it was sort of talked about like these are artworks, and they were like surrealist, but it was just, you know, kind of just copies of the same thing. It wasn't interesting. So, you know, to really make art is involved that you have to know about history. And so I think that what I've learned is that to make art requires just as much learning and discipline and you know, you have to see years of study to know what's before you, to really understand, to make something new. And that's just like in science. You have to study all these equations and all these formulas and figure things out so that you can innovate. So it's very similar and requires just as much, if not more, work to be an artist, you know, a professional. And so, you know, I think that that's an interesting thing where in this realm that all artists take all these influences, they go out and they're always watching and looking at other artists and what they're doing, and they're interpolating and they're coming up with their ideas, but it's always inflected by the culture around them. And then they have to come up with something new. And that's the thing that AI cannot really do. I think AI is really helpful for coming up with lots of ideas, but you're going to be the one that sparks that one new thing. Right, and then you're gonna be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is if you look at these models, on average, they're average. Like, so you think about ChatGPT, it's a huge body of work that's being collected. The reason ChatGPT sounds kind of bland, it's the average of all this stuff put together. There's nothing unique, you know, if you need a business letter or, you know, I'm really sorry for your inconvenience, you know, press 2 if you want one. It's really good at doing that because that's what it does. And same thing, if you collect all the imagery in the world, which is very different than what Picasso did, where he says, these are people I appreciate, I revere, their style is something interesting, this one has something else, and they're blending that together. What we have is this huge porridge, and I think it's not very special yet. If and when we figure out how to make AI seek out either unique things or figure out how to curate on its own, that's a whole new, you know, kind of technology than what exists today.
Did we touch on the ethics of AI in the ways that you all wanted to get to?
I mean, I think the one ethical thing right now is that what's really going on with a lot of this is a lot of the work that's being used in these large models is protected. And it shouldn't, people shouldn't be taking copyrighted work, whether physical objects or written word. I mean, I still think we should follow the same legal regime, but already lots of people are working on, new collections of work that don't have those protections. So I think what's going on right now to some degree is unethical, but I think it will pass pretty quickly. A lot of people have said, instead of all these copyrighted photographs, they're starting to make unique photographs for people who get reimbursed for it. But right now it's pretty unethical.
I think the questions about ethics in the back were about the kind of social components of the data that we have. Our models are only learning from the data that it's given, and it's very difficult to control bias, to even understand bias. And you put bias data in, you're going to get biased results out. Does that have does that itself have any? Does that manifest in AI art world at all? It certainly does, in predictive policing, for instance. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Sounds like you have some opinions about this, Josh.
I think we should maybe take some questions from the audience, and we can kind of open it up now. There's other things on people's mind. Fernando?
So, riffing, first of all, thanks for this incredible exhibit and experience, and riffing a little bit on some of the points you were bringing about the kind of, in a sense, the fear that I've read about in the artistic community, with it's going to take our jobs and whatnot. But I have a different twist on that, which is kind of this idea of democratizing access to art in our lives in a different way. So this week I had a crazy experience. After seeing this exhibit last Saturday, I visited some friends, two friends who are both faculty. One teaches quantum mechanics at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. The other one is an aerospace engineer at GW. And they showed me, Lorena and her husband, and they showed me 2 songs they had made for their class. So the quantum mechanics professor had to give his students a test at the Naval Academy, and he asked for a hip hop song about Schrodinger's cat. And Lorena asked for a jazz swing vocalized song about open source software communities. And they were actually really cool. Now, they may not be fine art, as you, the artists, were referring to in the sense of being, or Ken, when you were kind of talking about really the true novel piece of art, but it brought art into a space that allowed for engagement with the students, right? For connection with them. Now, the lyrics, we looked a lot at them. I was blown away. Like, it picked up on things about open source communities or quantum mechanics that were like remarkable. We made one about Jupiter right down there. I'll send you a link later. But that role of I love music. I have zero musical talent to create music. And I don't have the time, but I realized we could bring music as a creative tool, and I don't pretend to become a musician, but it brings value, it opens communication. So that aspect of democratizing art in our lives, to me, is different than simply kind of stealing from artists. And I would love to hear what real artists kind of think about that.
I mean, one thing I'd say is I love the idea that more people will be able to create art. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal thing. Just, and what value we put on it, I think it's an individual choice. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day who went to art school, and they said, for the first 3 years, they read Art Forum magazine, trying to digest the postmodernist babble. And then after the 3rd year, they said, this is actually junk. What's interesting is the response I get in people. And, if you look at it, we started with photography. I think it's awesome that everyone in our pocket now has something that creates interesting imagery. Is it Edward Weston? Is it Ansel? Probably not. It's not Diane Arbus, but it doesn't mean that any image you make can't be amazing, beautiful, stunning. I mean, it's fantastic that we've now armed almost all of humanity with the means to make imagery. And, you know, I think as that extends to other domains of art, other realms, I think it's fantastic.
Hey, Josh?
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I think what hasn't been addressed is like the demarcation at this point, at least between commercial art and what we call fine art. And I realize in the intersection of the two, they kind of blur. But commercial art is where a lot of the dispute and ethical questions are going on. So it's like, there will literally be a signature sometimes that appears from the artist that is swiped. And so those are, you know, those are in lawsuits right now. So there's, so the commercial realm is serving a commercial purpose to represent something, right? So a lot of times it'll be used in an article, editorial, and a report or whatever, because I come from the commercial background, creating illustrations, right, which is a separate thing. So in the fine art realm, it's a lot more, I think there's a lot more opportunity there, and there's also a lot more opportunity to get out of some of the ethical quandaries that, you know, are present in the more commercial representational realm. Like everyone seems to be kind of doing these steampunk images now, you know, with alien looking, you know, droopy creatures, whatever, look like octopuses or whatever, with Tinkerbell wings, whatever it is. And that's all fine and good, you know, that's the fun. You get to just go in and whoever you are, it doesn't matter, you know, put it in and that's fine. Speaking to your point that like the more imagery, the better, but there is a real problem with how the machine appropriates, you know, stuff directly and down to like signatures or little actual representational pieces. So the fine art part is, I think, really, you know, more compelling in the sense that the tools can be used in such a way, and this is all my work around the wall here, the tools that can be used in a way that, I mean, what I was attempting to do is to make it as departed from anything that existed before. I kept messing with the language to get it to produce things that were weird or different, you know, that I couldn't immediately say, oh, that looks like a Rothko, or that looks like, you know, a Diebenkorn, or whatever it is, right? So I use language in such a way to produce something, try to get other things to emerge from it. And I think that that's where a lot of the upside is, you know, a lot of the great potential is there where you start to tease out of the machine. That's what goes through the machine, tease out some other stuff that isn't engaged in necessarily the ethical quandaries that are present when you're in more commercial or representational.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because we've been talking about it mostly in the visual realm. We also have a music piece here. Luke was the artist who I think had to step out because he's performing now a musical piece somewhere on campus. And you know that work I certainly consider lives in the fine art realm in the sense they did some very interesting sonification of animal sounds that were in confinement. And after we end here, we'll bring those sounds back up for you to hear them. But you know, on these raps about Schrodinger's cat, the thing that's hidden behind that is all the appropriation of all the music that probably wasn't in the open source that went into that. And so while we can appreciate it, you know, just sort of makes us feel good and it's pretty cool, sounds like getting back to the ethical realm, we have to be, as we're democratizing these tools and these capabilities, we need to make sure that we're also being mindful of where all the information came from that was used to train. Other questions? I saw a couple other hands up. Yes?
Yes. Ken spoke of the fact that human intelligence is very subtle compared to robot intelligence. But AI is in its infancy. Are we confident that in the year 2050, if we go in an art gallery and see paintings, we will know which were human generated versus AI generated?
Well, I would say. All right.
That's not a robotic dog. It looks so lifelike.
And it looks lifelike.
It does, yeah.
Good girl. Come here. Stop. I can't say that. You're right. You're right. I think it's a great question, and you know, I think anyone who says dismisses what AI as not being relevant is also, you know, I wouldn't do that, because also let's not underestimate what's happened in the last couple of years with ChatGPT and DALL-E has been remarkable. It is really, it is impressive. I agree with you. It's beyond what I thought we'd see. And it's inevitable, and it's inevitable, I would say also it is creative. I thought that we wouldn't see creative AI in my lifetime. And this is creative. It's doing creative things, no doubt. So I'm not gonna write that off, and I think it could happen. But I do think that humans are gonna stay ahead at that time, and so there's gonna be really sophisticated conceptual work that our humans are gonna do that's gonna always be in contrast to what's coming up there. But who knows, maybe there will be a conceptual piece that an AI system comes up with, and I'd be excited to see. But it's gonna be a human that's gonna recognize that, I think, and say that's really exceptional. It's going to be the curator, you know. That's the other thing we haven't talked too much about, but there's a curation process, the selection, and also as every artist does, there's iterations, right? And you start with, you know, just like the chairs, right? You went through thousands of iterations with the chairs, Carl. And I think that what's so interesting is that artists. I was just listening to something about there's a new book about creativity and the editing process and how artists will go through dozens or hundreds of versions. And writers too, right? They're always taking this and crafting it. And when do you end? When is it finished? Right? There's all these million decisions, and that's the human that's making those decisions. And I don't know if we'll have an AI system making that decision, right? Deciding what's going to be good in 2050.
Okay.
Hey, I would just add to that also that, you know, what we haven't talked about is, even if we do have AIs making great art, like, it doesn't take away from the fact that many humans want to express themselves through their art. They want to be creative and create things, and they're gonna have to find maybe new ways of doing that. But that's so wired into us, is to create and to make, that even if our tools change, we'll still keep making art. Like, I don't think that will go away. In fact, it might be more so, right? Sorry.
No. Well, I had two things to say. One was just this idea of, one of the things we're doing now is we're asking questions. It'll be interesting when the AI starts knowing what interesting questions are. You know, we all have these prompts about make something that looks like this, or make a rap song that does this. When does the AI start, doing that? And then the second thing is, and this is going to go over like a lead balloon, so I warn you in advance. Inside an art gallery, I personally don't care that there's this distinction about fine art. It just doesn't matter to me. And I'm more interested in the democratization of tools for people to make things. And I can tell you I'll tell you a slightly funny story. I'll try to make it short. During this period that was called the maker movement, people started doing 3D printing and all this stuff, and it kind of made these tools more accessible and democratized. I went and I gave a talk, and I was backstage in the green room, and me and this guy, Chris Anderson, you know Chris. Chris and I are talking to Bill Gates, and we're having this conversation. We're saying, like, people really want to make things. They want to create art. It's just human instinct to try to make things that haven't gone before, or things they've seen and been inspired by. Bill didn't buy it at all. Like, totally didn't buy it at all. He's like, you guys are kind of full of shit. We go out on stage, we give our talk, go back, and I'm leaving, and I actually asked my mom and my sister to come to this thing in New York City because they'd never seen me at like one of these events, and so they came. And we're walking out, and this woman comes up to me and says, I was in the green room with you guys, and I totally agree. It is human nature to want to create. And whether people are sewing or cooking or making art or doing photography, that is just part of the human spirit. And I said, great, thanks. She said, I see you with your family. Go ahead. What it's okay if you go. So I walk out, and only my sister would know this. And she looks at me and says, you have no idea who said that. I said, of course not. She said, that was Martha Stewart.
So I think on that note, we're going to thank our panelists. For wonderful for coming as well. Many of the artists I see are here, so hopefully they can stand by their work. I know many of you are going to have lots of questions. We didn't answer all of them today. That wasn't the point. But thank you so much for coming.
And thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
for-
Yeah.